If you find a Negro voting, tell him to leave the poll. If he refuses, kill him. Alfred Waddell.
Despite all the intimidation, many black voters were turning out and were voting. So the word goes out from Democratic headquarters that if we can't intimidate the black votes and get a majority that way, we will simply stuff the ballot boxes. And that's exactly what they do.
Every black candidate in North Carolina was defeated. But in Wilmington, the political victory did not satisfy white anger. A mob set Manly's newspaper on fire, and every black official was driven out of office.
They could not wait until it was time for the change of office to take place.
They decided to take control.
It was basically a coup. They just took the offices away from the duly elected office holders.
So there are no longer any black officials in Wilmington city government.
The coup was followed by a massacre.
Firing began, and it seemed like a mighty battle in wartime. They went on firing, it seemed, at every living Negro. Poor volleys, being like sportsmen, firing at rabbit feet. The shrieks and screams of children, of mothers and wives, caused the blood of the most inhuman person to creep. Men lay on the street, dead and dying. Members of their race walked by, unable to do them any good. Reverend Allen Kirk.
They went after business owners. They went after voters. They went after doctors and black lawyers. Those are the people they ran out of town because those are the people they saw as getting out of their place and therefore encouraging other black people to get out of their places.
Despite the odds against them, fought back. Others protested to the
Blacks from all over the United States wrote letters to the President of the United States begging him to intervene and to stop the violence and the killing in Wilmington.
President William McKinley remained silent.
I think it showed that the national government had lost its commitment to protecting the civil and political rights of blacks, especially in the South.
Charles Francis Bourke, a northern reporter, witnessed blacks fleeing from the city.
In the woods and swamps, hundreds of innocent, terrified men and women wander about, fearful of the vengeance of whites, fearful of death. Without money or food, insufficiently clothed, they fled from civilization and sought refuge in the wilderness. In the night, I hear children crying, and a voice crooning a mournful song.
And those of us who were left found our places and stayed there.
The destruction of black political power in North Carolina unleashed a wave of racial discrimination triumphantly announced in newspapers and printed on postcards. Facilities that were once integrated were now legally segregated. Public transportation and parks, restaurants and theaters, jobs and juries. The relative oasis that North Carolina had been for blacks was now a desert of white supremacy. But 18-year-old Charlotte Hawkins Brown was one young woman who refused to accept this way of life. Jim Crow was a challenge to be overcome, not an obstacle to prevent her from fulfilling her mission.
I sit in the Jim Crow car, but my mind is rejuvenated to strive harder, to build a race that will rise in majesty and break down every wall of segregation in American life. Charlotte Hawkins Brown.
Leaving Massachusetts, where she had been educated, she returned to her home state of North Carolina to teach.
When Charlotte Hawkins got off the train, there was no station, so she had no idea where she was. It was in the middle of the woods. So I think it was a little fear. You know, this is not New England. I'm in a different place. Where am I? I'm in this state. I have no idea. I don't remember. Yes, it's my home state, but where do I go from here? I think she adjusted well.
In 1901, she converted an old blacksmith shed into a schoolhouse and opened the Alice Freeman Palmer Memorial Institute. For the next 2 decades, she struggled to raise money to build a school, an outstanding educational institution. Because white donors were reluctant to support a school that developed minds rather than domestic skills, Brown had to use subterfuge.
When Brown begins teaching there, she has to say that she has a vocational school.
I think the reason that whites wanted African Americans to continue the agriculture and domestic skills was it kept them at a certain level. I mean, it did not give them the education to inspire them to do more.
Her teachers said that you would pretend to have a vocational school on the outside, and then you would go in your classroom and teach them French or Latin or anything that you knew.
As people said, she had highfalutin ideas and high aims for her students. And she was teaching the 3 R's, but she was also intent on teaching them leadership qualities.
During the early years, in order to raise money for the school, Dr. Brown had to come up with some type of fundraising solution. And she came up with letter writing to all of the Northerners, telling them what they've learned at the school, what they were doing, writing and requesting support, anything. I mean, anything that they could give at that time.
Dear Mrs. Worth, I have worried your patience, no doubt, but I have delivered the message of my soul to you. It is not the message of an individual, but the cry of a struggling race. Please make all checks payable to the treasurer, Charlotte Hawkins Brown.
I am sending you $10 for your school, which I hope will be put to good use. I advise you to instruct your girls to be virtuous, for moral looseness is an unfortunate quality of many young women of your race.
Her life was a balancing act. Her life was an act of trying to appease white people, white liberals who would give the school money and who would try to help the school in other ways. And then on the other hand, to try to work in an African American freedom struggle that she clearly saw as ongoing, that she clearly saw herself as part of.
She fought fights that people didn't usually fight in those days. They just went along with the system. But I think that if at any time she could go against the system, that's what Dr. Brown did. She took them to the movie theater where she would have special showing so they didn't have to sit up in the balcony.
She was, of course, as we always said, a woman ahead of her time. She was smart enough to use every opportunity to develop the students.
Yeah, she always taught us that you can be as good as anybody else, regardless of what your color is. She taught us that, and we appreciated that. Because, you go around thinking that you can't do this and you can't that, you will never be nothing or something like that. She told us that wasn't true. We could be anything we wanted to be.
Recognizing the need of a cultural approach to life, I have devoted my life to establishing for Negro youth something superior to Jim Crowism. Sometimes the prejudice is so great, I feel that I can't stand it a day longer. But then I look into the delicate faces of the children and determine to stick it out no matter what the cost. Charlotte Hawkins Brown.
She never accepted that she was going to have to live like this. And she never accepted the fact that her students were going to have to live like this.
Charlotte Hawkins Brown tried to shelter her children from the racial storms raging about them. Others did not escape. Like 12-year-old Cy Williams, sentenced to 20 years on a convict lease gang for taking a horse he was too small to ride. 8-year-old Will Evans, who received 2 years for stealing change off a store counter. And Mary Gay, sentenced to 30 days for taking a hat. She was 6 years old. By the turn of the century, tens of thousands of Americans, 1/4 of whom were children, had been condemned to hard labor in convict lease camps.